So I hope y'all are ready for a metaphysical Bible geek out this morning. Amy and I were in the car last week, and I'm having some unique issues with my car stereo. And Amy said, well, why don't you take it in and have it fixed? And I said, just like this, I said, oh no, none of these things can they fix. And she did kind of a double take, and she said, okay, Yoda, what is this language you're speaking? And I said, I'm sorry, I've been knee-deep in metaphysical Bible study all week. So if I start speaking in tongues, now you know why. So this one is a doozy, not any longer than my usual talks, but I dove into so much material that I'm really only touching on in my message that I wanted to make that material available to you. So the following resources are available in the video description on Facebook and YouTube. There is an outline of my talk that's also printed out and available for you. The ushers will be handing out that outline to you on your way out this morning if you're in the sanctuary. It's linked online as well. My full slide deck is linked there as well. If for any reason you can't see or read my slides, they're available in the video description. And then all of the readings and writings that I reference throughout the talk are available in their entirety, along with a list of recommended Unity books from Unity Worldwide. That's all linked in the video description. Thank you. So if you want to dive deeper into metaphysical Bible study or the power of the spoken word, be sure to check out those resources. So, in keeping with our theme this month, I thought it would be fun to start with a look at how the power of words, both spoken and unspoken, can distort how we interpret things. There are many common sayings or idioms in the English language that we've come to accept as meaning one thing, but are in fact a part of a larger expression that means something completely different. For example, the early bird gets the worm. Common saying, right? It means to achieve your dreams, you have to get out in front of the competition. But the complete saying is this: the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. In other words, there is also value in hanging back and observing the competition. Here's another one that, funnily enough, has the opposite connotation when viewed fully. Curiosity killed the cat. Meaning, don't jump into the deep end too quickly or you'll hurt yourself. The full saying is this: curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. So I may be rewarded for poking around in the unknown. And finally, this one: money is the root of all evil. The actual phrase, which comes straight from the Bible, is this: the love of money is the root of all evil. Two very different things, as we at Unity know that money can do incredible things when given and received with gratitude rather than possessiveness. The specific verse in the Bible is 1 Timothy 6:10, and I love how Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore expands upon it. I was going to try to shorten this, but I just can't. It's too good, especially as we're shortly moving into the holiday season, a season of giving. So with that in mind, please listen to this. By loving money, man has in some way limited it. He has not loved the true source of money, but has loved the thing rather than the spirit that it expresses. He has broken the law by trying to grasp the thing and failing to acknowledge the idea that lies back of it. We must know this law, observing it in the handling of money, and make love the magnet of supply instead of becoming entangled in that selfishness and greed which is causing so much inharmony and suffering in the world today. We should know that there is a universal money substance and that it belongs to all of us in all its fullness. Can I get an amen? So today, we'll be examining the energy in back of our words and the words of others as we express our gratitude for early birds like Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, for second mice like Eric Butterworth, and curious cats like H. Emily Cady. It is their teachings that we carry on today and their words that inspired this message. We'll begin with a metaphysical look at God as Word in John chapter 1. From there, we'll look at the three stages that we all experience in our spiritual evolution. And finally, I'll share a personal account of how we can tune into the energy behind the words we say, and more specifically, the words we read and the words we sing. So take a breath with me. Take a sip of water with me if you need to. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John chapter 1, verse 1. What image springs to your mind when you hear this verse? For me, growing up, it was one of those verses that I knew of, I could quote it, but it wasn't really taught to me or expanded upon. And that might be on me. I grew up in a Christian home and went to church every Sunday, but when I was younger, I did my fair share of dozing off in the pew. So when I first heard this verse as a child, I always just envisioned the Bible sitting on a pedestal in the sky, like one of those Greek-style columns. Clouds are flowing around it. There it is, the Word of God. It was there the whole time, just waiting for man to write it all down. Of course, I would eventually grow up and simply read the entire first chapter of John to discover that the Christian interpretation of the Word is Jesus Christ. And we can go beyond calling this an interpretation to considering this a translation, because the Word as Jesus is made very clear in verse 14, where it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." And verse 17, which says, "Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." There you go. Now, spoiler alert, we know through our unity teachings that practically any time Jesus Christ is mentioned in Scripture, we can view his teachings and his works as demonstrations not only of the power of Jesus Christ, but of the Christ ideal, the divine idea that exists not only in Jesus, but who? Does anyone know? You can raise your hand. Yes, everyone with their hand raised, you're correct. It's you. It's everyone here. So if the Word in John chapter 2 is Jesus, and Jesus represents divine idea made manifest, then we must also be the Word. Keep this in mind as we discover through this lesson how powerful that truly makes us. So upon diving once again into this scripture as I prepared for today's lesson, my focus quickly shifted from what or who is the Word, because that's very clear, to why this very specific term, the Word. It's such an interesting, almost poetic analogy, and at least to my eye, the first chapter of John does little to expand upon why and how Christ relates to Word as we know it. In the original Greek translation of the New Testament, the term that would become translated as the Word is logos. There is no direct translation of logos to English, so therein lies the rub. But in Greek, it denotes wisdom, judgment, power, and as Charles Fillmore puts it, all the inherent potentialities of being. So we're still left with this question: why the Word? Couldn't logos be more accurately translated as idea, or limitless potentiality, or divine wisdom? In the beginning was divine wisdom. That has a ring to it, right? The true answer lies in those opening three words of the book of John: in the beginning. Where in the Bible do we also witness these three words? I hear it. Genesis, that's right. In the book of Genesis, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light." What John is essentially doing here is not unlike what Charles Fillmore would do in his metaphysical studies more than 1,800 years later. He is likening the coming of Christ through Jesus as a new beginning, in the same way that the experience of life as we know it began with a divine idea and four simple words: "Let there be light." And we can even use these four words today as a mantra to help us when we might be stuck and struggling to take that next step in faith. The coming of Christ through Jesus and subsequently through each and every one of us is as powerful as the metaphorical words that breathed life into our very existence. And it is that power that we must continue to exercise, or for some of us, begin to exercise to bring about positive change in our personal human experience and for the collective whole. So in his metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, Charles Fillmore says this: "The parallel between Genesis and John is shown by the manifestation of the ideal man. In Genesis, Adam appears first. In John, it is John the Baptist, who is said to bear witness to the coming man, Jesus. In Genesis, man was given dominion over all things. In John, all things were made through him. John the Baptist represents the natural man, the physical man, who is the nucleus around which the spiritual man builds. So at this point in his writings, Fillmore begins to talk a little about the stages of spiritual evolution that we experience on our human journey. And as you can see or hear, he himself writes with an almost biblical elegance. But I want to put this idea of the 3 stages of spiritual evolution into my own words. So essentially, we enter into the human state in ignorance. We begin our lives believing that the human experience and all of its perceived pleasure and pain is reality. Now, that may sound to us like a negative, like a mental state that we want to move on from, but this state of ignorance is essential to our spiritual journey of rediscovery. When I first discovered Unity's teachings, a prevalent question that I had personally was, why this experience? I agreed with our message as soon as I understood it. I saw it as absolute truth, but I kept coming back to this thought. If the essence of God is love, divine perfection, the energy of all good, then why is any of this human stuff even happening? Why wouldn't God just want to be that love? Now, there's 1,000 answers to that question. To me, the answer to that question, or at least the best answer we can express from our perspective, is that we are God rediscovering and re-experiencing itself. One of my favorite analogies that illustrates this comes from spiritual teacher Aaron Abke, where he asks you to imagine living your entire life in a single enclosed room that is entirely white. If the only color you ever knew was white, not only do you not know what black or blue or red is, but you also don't know what white is because you don't have anything to compare it to. There is no contrast. The human experience is that contrast for God. It is not enough for God or love to simply be divine. It wants to experience its divinity. And through us, that happens moment by moment, day by day, in 1,000 different miraculous ways. So that is step 1, ignorance. We only know our human selves, nothing more. Through our experiences, we eventually arrive at the next step in our spiritual evolution, which is represented by John the Baptist in John chapter 1. Verses 6 to 8 tell us that John was sent by God that he might bear witness to the light, that all might believe through him. That is what's happening right now. As we gather together here today and bear witness to or are made aware of the light, seeing that we are more than human. We hear the truths of our teachings. We are one. Fear is an illusion. To love is to forgive. But not only do we bear witness, we accept these truths. We live these truths. And by living God's truth, we become a part of the movement towards a fully awakened collective consciousness. We bear witness to the light until we enter into the final step in our spiritual evolution and are awakened by accepting and acting as that light, becoming that light, and therefore seeing only light. So we all experience and live as each of these stages of spiritual evolution. We are the man or woman in ignorance. We are made aware by witnessing the light. We are awakened as we become the light. And we are the word that instructs that light to shine. In their book, The Quest, Unity authors and former directors of Silent Unity, Richard and Mary Alice Jaffola, liken our thoughts and words to different forms of light. Think about all of our common light sources, from your standard overhead light bulb to a flashlight, all the way down to the flickering light of a candle or a match. No matter how large or small, all of these sources of light will illuminate the space around them, scattering light in all directions. In that way, they represent our subconscious and conscious thought. All these sources of scattered light are the unspoken words that Reverend Joe spoke about 2 weeks ago. Their effect on the mind is far-reaching, no matter how small or insignificant those words may feel. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I have dozens of thoughts that feel like scattered light, floodlights, if you will, blinding my ability to focus. We can learn how to center our thoughts by recognizing and respecting the power of the spoken word, by viewing our words as a much more focused source of light, not a match or a flashlight or even a spotlight, but a laser. Turning now to Richard and Mary Alice's words in The Quest. Words are the lasers of human thought. Rather than scattering in all directions, thoughts, when they are expressed as words, are in phase with each other. They are all going in the same direction, and this increases their power almost beyond belief. Now, we know that lasers can be harmful. They can burn, they can blind, they are strong enough to melt steel, but their power can be utilized and focused enough to do the opposite. They can heal our vision or reduce pain through surgery. They aid in construction by providing exact measurements and precise cutting. Laser light does not degrade as it is used, though you may have to replace the batteries in your laser pointer from time to keep your cat entertained. So too can our spoken words both heal and destroy, build up and tear down. To once again quote The Quest, we are accountable for every idle word we speak, for it brings forth after its kind. In a very real way, the word becomes flesh and dwells among us and in us and as us. We cannot help becoming what we say we are. The more resolutely and intensely we speak the word of who and what we are, the more surely we move toward becoming what we say. If we happen to accept the words directed to us by others, if we make their words our own, then we will move in that direction as well. So this year we've been exploring the 12 spiritual powers as discovered and taught by Charles Fillmore. And while our focus this month is on the power of our words, the actual spiritual power we've been exploring in September is power, which Fillmore describes in a number of ways, including the use of our words. We landed on that theme because it felt a little redundant to say, this month our theme is the power of power. So on power, I came across this quote by Charles Fillmore in his book, Jesus Christ Heals, that I found fascinating, and I've read it over and over again. And I want to share it with you as I believe it encapsulates the importance of how we perceive our thoughts and how we focus and translate our intentions into words. He says this: God does not exercise power. God is that all-present and all-quiet powerlessness from which man generates that which he calls power. Power is just a word that we at Unity use to describe the whole of the gifts that God gives us. To us, power describes the freedom that our teachings provide to create our experience, but some use it to describe superiority over others, to describe control, to imply inequality and separation. Fillmore here reminds us that God does not exercise power in any human way. God, the universe, does not even acknowledge the word. And this thing that we call power in its truest essence comes not from a place of strength or dominion or possessiveness, but from a place of peace. That all-present and all-quiet powerlessness, that peace that generates that which we call power. As we begin to close this morning, I want to provide two examples of the power of words in my life. And of course, I have to share an Ellie story. So my daughter Ellie loves books. We go to the library almost weekly and we get at least a dozen books, and me or Amy will read them to her at night before bed. One of Ellie's favorite book series is the Elephant and Piggy series by Mo Willems. We love these books because they teach simple lessons with a lot of pages, a lot of pictures, but only a few words on each page. They almost have a flipbook-like quality to how detailed and expressive the characters are. So this is Elephant Gerald and Piggy. I have no idea why Elephant Gerald gets his own name and Piggy is just Piggy, but Piggy doesn't mind. She's very happy with who she is. So one night, Ellie's going down for bed. We've read some of the new books we got at the library that day. It's time for her to go to sleep, but she likes to keep a couple books in her bed and look at the pictures before she falls asleep. So I get up to go and I say, hey, I got you these 2 new Elephant and Piggy books. We'll read them tomorrow, but go ahead and look at the pictures tonight before you go to sleep. The next morning, I walk into her room to wake her up. I turn on the light and I notice that one of the Elephant and Piggy books is sitting on the floor on the opposite side of the room from where her bed is. I walk over to pick it up, and Ellie sits up and says, Daddy, I don't like that Elephant and Piggy book. Something bad happened to Elephant Gerald, and I think he's sick. So I open the book, and I flip through the pages, and this is what I see. Now, imagine you're 3 years old. I've removed the words. They don't really tell you much without the connotation of the whole story, but I've removed the words so that you can see what Ellie saw. You know Elephant and Piggy as this, but you open the book and see this. That's a little scary, right? So I sat down with Ellie and I said, hey, I get it. I can see why this would be a little scary for you, but you're just looking at the pictures without knowing the words. Why don't we read it together and find out what's really going on? So we read it. The story was called I Really Like Slop, and essentially Piggy wanted Elephant Gerald to try one of her favorite dishes, an unknown and unique cuisine for Gerald, who instantly had reservations due to the way the dish looked and smelled. He does eventually muster up the strength, the will to explore the unknown. He tries the food. He has this reaction, which as we're reading the story, Ellie now realizes is not scary, but is hilarious. He decides he doesn't like the dish, but he's grateful for the experience. And now that all of these possibilities of what was going on in Ellie's mind have become focused through an understanding of the author's intention through his words, this became her favorite book that month, that week. And we read it every night, sometimes more than once. So that's a fun look at the power of words. It's no secret that I love words. I express my spirituality and creativity through a very intentional arrangement of words, through talks like this one. I am a songwriter and lyricist. I write the copy for all of our events and many of our marketing materials here at Unity. And when Amy and I discovered Unity and came on as the music directors, words and how we express them and how you perceive them became very important to us. My father was a general manager for contemporary Christian radio for over 50 years. I grew up with praise and worship music, which is basically the Christian equivalent of what we call our community chants. In college, I fell out of the Christianity I had grown up in and considered myself an agnostic until I discovered Unity in 2019. During that part of my life, my mama always said, son, I know you'll find your way back to God. And as I began to do just that, I found myself returning to the music that I'd grown up with, and I was hearing it from the perspective of unity, the perspective of oneness. And even when the lyrics were very clearly implying a God separate from myself, I was able to tap into the energy of love from which all music comes, and to hear only that intention, the intention of love. Early on, Amy and I became obsessed with changing the lyrics of some of these songs that I grew up with in order to very clearly demonstrate our belief, our knowing that God is within, that we are capable of performing miracles just as Jesus did. And someday we might expand on this idea with a full Sunday message. But to make a long story short, I shared this struggle with Reverend Carla. If you're new here, she is a transitional specialist from Unity World Headquarters who walked with this community through our growth over the past year. And she simply said this to me. She said, Jesse, sometimes we need a God who's out there. I needed to hear that. I needed to sit with that. Because it is important that we see God out there. Because God out there is a reflection of what's in here. And when we worship, when we seem to be speaking to God, what we're doing is claiming the outer as the inner and vice versa. That is what we're doing when we ask God to open the eyes of our hearts. When we ask God to pour itself in us And in this song that we're going to share as we close, when we ask God to speak to us until God can speak through us. To celebrate our new beginning by declaring not only, let there be light, but let me be